Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War.
They had these full masks. And so my mask was made to make me look like, and now I resent this, by the way, a 60-year-old Russian woman.
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to Cold War history. Please make sure you follow us in your podcast app so you don't miss future episodes. I explore the remarkable journey of CIA Operations Officer Susan Miller, who transitioned from a quiet childhood in California to the thrilling world of espionage. What began as a joke application to the CIA turned into a life-changing opportunity. The episode delves into a rigorous training, including paramilitary courses that prepared her for the realities of fieldwork, and thrilling stories from her time in Moscow during the 1980s. Susan also gives tradecraft insights on surveillance techniques and the unique challenges faced by women in intelligence roles during that era. I'm delighted to welcome Susan Miller to our Cold War conversation.
I went to college at California Polytechnic San Luis Obispo, got a degree in journalism, went down to the journalism school to get an application to different newspapers, and I found an application instead to CIA, and I sent it in as a joke, and 40 years later, it wasn't a joke, clearly.
Not at all, not at all. And when you were a kid, what did you think you were going to do for a job?
All I know is I wanted to go overseas. I found California so boring. I wanted to get out of it. You know, as a kid, I'm going to say this is starting more like 8th grade, 9th grade, as you're starting to think about what you want to do for a career. And so that's what I wanted to do, something that would get me out there. I knew I wasn't going to be an engineer. I liked math. I was good at math, but I didn't love it that way. I knew I wasn't going to be a scientist, and this sounded like a really fun thing. And so I got into the J school at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I ended up, by the end of it, being one of the editors on the daily newspaper that they had then. Yeah.
And you fancied yourself sort of like a roving journalist getting international scoops all around the world.
I did. I wanted to live overseas. Believe it or not, when you live in California your whole life, you're like, this is so boring. I want something different. And so when I saw this thing for CIA, I'm like, I think I can go overseas. And then they interviewed me. They came to they have interviewers stationed like in many of the big states, and so she came and we met in a room in Morro Bay. And she told me at the end of it, she goes, okay, I think I'm going to move you forward, but you got to know from now on, you got to tell people that this interview didn't work. You're okay to tell your parents and your brothers, but nobody else. And I'm like, okay. So, and then the next thing was bringing me out to Washington for a polygraph, for a psychological test, and for, some additional type of things, physical tests, things like that. And so they flew me out to Washington, I want to say like a month later, for all of that. And that was loads of fun. First time I'd ever been on the plane by myself without my parents and all the rest of the stuff. And I got here and I landed, and I kind of got here a couple days early, and I stood on the mall, right in front of where the White House and the Capitol building is. I'm like, I'm in the right place. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And so then I went to started about a week later. Yeah.
What age were you then when you arrived in Washington?
21. My birthday falls in September, so I landed here, and I actually started at the CIA when I was 21.
Presumably the CIA also did some vetting of your background and asking neighbors and stuff like that.
They did. And that was pretty funny because a lot of the questions, I think because I was in California, according to my friends who called me later, and were about how much pot did she use, how much drugs did she use, and this, that, and the other thing. And I'd never done a drug in my life. Yes, I will admit to underage drinking, but, I'd never done a drug in my life. And so that was a lot of the questions were about that. Has she ever tried to subvert the United States, and one of my friends laughed out loud and like, "How? I'm from California?" Most of the states hate California. They wouldn't mind if we were subverted, you know? So, anyway, it was pretty funny.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So this is 1985. What sort of roles are they offering for women in the CIA at this point?
So, here's the interesting thing, the person who interviewed me was a woman, and she actually said to me, "One of the things that we are really focused on is getting more women into this line of work." At that point, she had already told me it looked like I could be hired as long as I passed the security stuff. And so I asked her at that time, "Well, how many women are gonna be in it?" And she goes, "Well, you'll probably be about, a 10th or an eighth of your class." And she said, "We're trying to up it, because we know we need more." They didn't call it diversity, we just needed different people, we just needed to do that more. And she said, "And we're also trying to hire more people of color, of every color, every background kind of thing." I was like, "Oh, that's really cool," kind of thing. And so then it was a couple weeks later, got on the plane and came out to do the polygraph, and which was stunning because, he's asking me, "Have you ever subverted the United States of America?" I'm like, "No." I mean, why would I have a chance in California, of course? But it was a good question because you wanna know, "Have you ever talked to a Russian?" "No." Well, there was a Russian place in San Francisco where I bought, some pastries once, kinda thing. It was such a stupid, and the guy's just rolling his eyes at me because I had nothing. I hadn't really traveled overseas either, at that point. And, yeah, so he also asked, the polygrapher also asked, "Have you ever done drugs?" And I'm like, "No." And he goes, "You're from California, you had to have done them." "No, I didn't." And he kept saying over and over, and he goes, "I'm gonna fail you, I'm gonna fail you, I'm gonna fail you." And I'm like, I swear to God, I will drink everything. I've snuck down across the border to Mexico just so I could get cheap booze there without being carded, I mean, I can tell you I'm not, like, perfect, but anyway, it turned out, he left, and then somebody else came in and said, "We're gonna start all over." And that person had been watching him, and he was bullying me, basically. And so I ended up passing it. And so next thing I knew, I was getting all of this information about when to show up, where to show up, how to show up, what they would reimburse, what they wouldn't, and getting out to Washington.
And were you nervous at that polygraph test?
I was nervous just because I didn't know what it was, but I wasn't nervous because I thought I was gonna lie. And I'm not a liar. I might have lied to some people over the years when I was undercover and told them I worked for State Department, but that was with, that was work. But I'm not a liar. So I wasn't going to lie then, and I don't now. So
You said you sort of almost accidentally applied for the CIA. Did you think, well, if I don't get this, I can do the journalism or
yes.
something like that? Or did you
Mm.
really want to do this role?
So I wanted to get out of California. And so I really was interested in this because it was so unique and different and everything else. And so no matter what, I would have gotten out of California somehow. But I was excited about the idea of going all the way across the country to our capital and doing something adventurous. And if you talk to my parents, they will say, "Oh, yeah, from the time Susan was 4 to about 10, she was always on suicide watch, wanting to jump over cliffs and things like that." So they weren't surprised.
When they're inducting you, are they telling you what sort of roles you could be doing?
Yeah. They gave us at the time, there were 4 directorates. There was the Directorate of Operations, and there's a couple of different career tracks you could take there, and they couldn't describe them in great detail, but they said one will bring you overseas, and you will be working with the people who are spying for us. Another would bring you overseas less times, but you would still be supporting the spying, but it would be from our headquarters. And then they kind of went through the DS&T, which is the science and technology, and I'm not a scientist, that was clear. The DDI did not exist then, which is our digital innovation ones, the ones that do ones and zeros, that didn't exist. The DA really tried to hire me too, which is the analyst. And I was like, how soon will I be able to go overseas as an analyst? Because I thought that could be fun too. And they're like, well, if you work really hard in 10 years, you could probably get a tour overseas. And I'm like, crossing that one off. And that was it, So, and then the directorate of support, which was not something you have to understand, like budget and stuff like that. That clearly wasn't even offered to me.
So what was that initial training like? What were they training you on?
So it was kind of hilarious. So I get to CIA headquarters. We're told, go stay in this hotel. We'll pay everything. We'll pay for a rental car, blah, 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 and drive up to CIA headquarters and, stop at the gate, have your driver's license, tell them, that you're here for the new CT class and blah, blah, blah. And so it was, first of all, extremely nerve-wracking to turn down that place where there's people with guns standing and, all the rest of this stuff, and I'm just kinda going by feeling like an imposter, honestly. And so I get up to the gate, and they show me where I gotta go in, and I gotta show the driver's license. I get back in the car, and they say, "Okay, now you gotta go up here, and here's where you park." And I said, "Well, where do I go in after I park?" And they say, "You go in the main entrance." "How do you get there from that parking lot?" Well, they had to tell me that. Okay. So I finally go park the car, and I get to the main entrance, and I go in, and I see a whole bunch of other people standing in line, like my age, around in their 20s, maybe a couple of them were 30, with their licenses out and things like that. And then, so we got in, and the first thing they wanted to do was get us our real badge so that we didn't have to do this. We could just badge in from now on. We didn't have to do this anymore. So I go and I get in the badge line, and I'm standing in that badge line, and there's a whole bunch of guys, and somehow, however it ended up, 4 of us girls ended up out of 8 of us in the class, 4 of us girls ended up in the same area, and we were all talking. "Hey, where are you from? Blah, blah, blah," that kind of thing. "Does anybody have a permanent home yet, a permanent place?" "No, none of us do." "Hey, why don't we get together and try to find a place together?" And we did. So we badged in, and we went to the first course where they taught us about what the different parts of CIA do and everything else, and how we would do it and how our course would be. So long story short, me and those girls, we did find a house in Old Town that we went to, and we stayed in for like 4 years. And then we started splitting up because we started going overseas. But we just became, super, super good friends. And it was so clear that this was cool. And C, in that line, like I said, there was 8 of us, but, all the guys were really nice too, etcetera. So we started in this thing where they sat us down. It's called CTDC. It was called the Career Trainee Course, which is my course. And it was the very first course in the course. I forget what DC stands for, Discovery something or other. And it tells you then about what each of the directorates do and how they do it and blah, 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 blah. And it also lays out what your program was going to be. So they divided us in half. And the first half of us was going to go to paramilitary course first. And that was and it was a 3-month paramilitary course down at the farm, which is now openly Camp Perry. And because the big Soviet, US, Europe fight was going on, and that included in places like Nicaragua and South America and Africa. And so they wanted all of us to be trained in how to do bombs, how to throw things to insurgents that were supporting from an airplane, how to do machine guns, Uzis, grenades. Yeah, we almost got killed by a grenade when somebody threw it right at our feet. And all of us were in line going, "Ah!" And luckily an instructor saw it and just barely got it over this little hill and saved our lives. But anyway, so yeah, what could go wrong there? And so we had a ball doing that. And I would say it was a fabulous thing because we all still are friends from that class. I mean, some have moved away, but whenever they're back, we get together with them. And there's a couple people we didn't really like and a couple people who quit early, that's true, but, it was just a really good class, and so that's what we did, and then after that, at that point, you came in, like, you're gonna be either an analyst, an ops officer, S&T, or a whatever, and they'd put me in as an analyst, and I realized once I found out what all of it did, it wasn't gonna work, and so I went and talked to somebody. I was brave, it was so scary. I remember one of the instructors, and I told him, "I think I really wanna be an ops officer, I don't wanna be an analyst," and he helped me change it, and they were very willing to change it at the time, and so that's how I got into the operations side. I wanted to live overseas. Yeah.
With the paramilitary training, was that a bit like basic training? Were they focusing on physical fitness as well as
Yes,
use of weapons? So it was like a basic training course for
it
being in the
was.
army.
Every morning we had to run, and we weren't good runners at the beginning, but by the end, we had to be able to do a mile, and it wasn't like a 4-minute mile or something like that. We had to be able to do a mile in 10 minutes or something like that, and, to get through that course. And then on the shooting, they didn't really care. They were looking for people who could shoot well, but they were also looking for people who listened and handled the guns safely. And so, like, I grew up shooting, not things, or people, but I grew up shooting. My dad, was a duck hunter, and he would take my brothers duck hunting, and it was boys only. So I would always from like 4th grade on, I'd be like, "What about me? I wanna go shoot a gun." And, he's like, "Okay, fine." So he got me trap shooting. And so I did trap shooting and rifle shooting with him, like, on ranges and stuff, and had a ball. So, hilariously, during the paramilitary course, we had done some Uzis, we'd already done some rifle shooting, and now we were going to be doing shotguns, and we're gonna shoot trap, and they had a little trap thing set up out there, and this one guy, he was hilarious, we loved this guy, his name was Pete, he was a lovable guy, but he could also be kinda crotchety and stuff, and so, again, I'm only one of a few girls, and I happened to be the first girl up to do the shotgun, and Pete, as I'm walking up, says, "Hey, everybody, you gotta look at the little blondie from California get knocked over by the shotgun." And I looked at him and I did this. I looked with my eyes. And he's like, he kind of, "Oh, well, what's going to happen here?" And bottom line, I powdered all five. I was the only one in the whole class that powdered all five. And after I powdered the last one, Pete stood up and saluted me. And we were good friends after that. So, yeah.
Brilliant story. Were you also trained on Soviet weapons?
Yeah, we had Uzis. And we also had, I forget the name of the Soviet rifle, Kalashnikov, I think
The
it's called.
AK-47?
The
Kalashnikov.
AK-47, yeah, we had to learn how to do those too, and that was
Okay.
interesting too, yeah.
You said that you managed to then get onto the path of being an operations officer. So what did the training for that involve?
So the first part of the course was like a year-long course of doing different things, and we had to do different interims in between, like go and, work in the China Center, work in the counterterrorism center, and we were just like the little guys that were often just bringing papers different places, but we would also write some things. And so you learn a little bit there, and one of the ones I had was Russia, or it was the USSR desk, and so I was there and on an interim, and I really enjoyed it, and I really wanted to go someplace, not only exotic, but something that really mattered to the United States. I didn't wanna go someplace like a island somewhere that didn't really matter, so I was really looking at that or China or, something else, like that. And so, when I finished the course, my advisor came with the guy from headquarters that was gonna tell us where we were going, and the guy from headquarters said, "So, you said that you wanted to go to someplace really interesting like the Soviet or East European or China or something like that." And I said, "100%." And he goes, "Good, because that's where you're going." And I said, "Which?" And he goes, "Moscow." And I'm like, "Woohoo!" And because it could have been anywhere, because we had a Soviet unit in every single station around the world. I was thinking that when they told me I was gonna be going to do, the Soviet stuff, I'd go down to someplace warm and do it there and do the recruiting job there. But they sent me to Moscow, and I was totally thrilled and challenged by that. And it did involve about 3 more months of training.
I mean, Moscow is a really plum posting, isn't it? Isn't that where anybody would want to be? Because that's sort of like the sharp end of the Cold War.
Yeah, no, so a lot of people did not want to go to places like that. They spoke Chinese or they spoke Arabic, and they thought they'd be going somewhere else. But a fair number of us, and I would say probably not quite half the class, ended up going to Soviet or East European type jobs, whether you were an analyst or an ops officer or whatever. And so there was one other guy that went to Russia House, as we called it, the Soviet East European Division. And there was one other guy that went there, but he didn't go into Moscow. He ended up going to one of the other places. And others were scattered around. And there was some that went to China, etc.
How much Russian did you know at the point you were told you were going to Moscow?
0. And so what they do is they first want to make sure you pass what's called the Soviet East European Internal Ops course, which is like what we did at the farm, but on steroids. You need to be able to really detect surveillance without knowing that. And when you do surveillance down in Williamsburg, let's be honest, detecting it is not hard. So this was up here in the DC area. And so it was, we had training on it first. And then we would go on these routes, and they would really look to see, could you detect surveillance? Because if you cannot, and some people can't, and no harm, no foul, you'll get another job. But some people can't, and it's a minority that can't. I was able to find it every time. And they want you to be able to find it without like looking around for it, because if I'm undercover, I need to be, in my car just looking for it, not like being obvious. Later on in your tour, once they know who you are, it doesn't really matter, right? But at the beginning, when you're undercover and they want you to be undercover for as long as possible, that's what they want you to do. And so that was another thing that was part of the course as well, was understanding that. And so to get my Russian, they put me in a course for 1 year, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Wow. Wow. And had you got a sort of ability for learning languages prior to this point or not?
The only language I had taken prior to this point was French in high school, and I took some French in college, and I got A's. But French is kind of English light sometimes, So I was a little bit nervous about the Cyrillic letters, and I was a little bit nervous because I knew it was a completely different grammar system. Slavic grammar is. And so, but when I got into the language course, I realized I'm good at math. I can't apply it anywhere, but I'm good at it. It's very mathematical. And so that is what I loved about it. It wasn't like French, where for every rule, there's like 25 exceptions for the rule. Like on a Monday, you say this, on a Tuesday, you might do that. And in Russian, it's always the same. You might change things, but the thing will change like it is. It might be moved to the front because you want to emphasize that more of the sentence versus the back of the sentence. I loved it. And deciphering the letters and stuff like that, it was like deciphering a code, like when you're in 5th grade and you're writing in code to your friends and trying to dodge the teacher. It was really fun. So I was good at that, and I ended up with a 4 level in Russian.
Wow. Wow. Just going back to the surveillance, I mean, how do you know that you're being surveilled? I mean, I've heard stories of, that people trying to follow you will change clothes, hats, stuff like that, but they rarely change their shoes, and that can be a giveaway. I mean, were there other tricks like that you sort of...
The shoes were 100%, but first you want to know, because the first part of the surveillance detection route, I guess sometimes we do just walk out of the embassy and start the walking tour, and we never get in the car, but mostly you kind of get in a car because you just want to see what's out there. And so you get in the car and you have a route, like on a Saturday, and you're going to go to a shopping area, which is was back in the day hard to find in Moscow. And you would go there and you go do a couple things and you'd see if anybody's on you. And if you didn't see anybody obvious, then you would go outside the comfort zone a little bit more. And then you'd see, does anything follow me from inside to outside? And then from outside to outer side. And then you would go like crazy and do really provocative things just to triple check that you didn't have surveillance. And so that's what you would do just to make sure. And at that point, then you would find a way to ditch your car, get on the subway, and go do what you needed to do. And in your usually, as you're ditching the car, you're also putting on a disguise so that they don't they don't accidentally recognize you on a subway or on a bus or on a tram or something like that.
And when you say a disguise, that's clothing generally, is it, or something else?
It was usually just something that changes your profile. It's clothing and a wig. Like if I'm blonde, I might be more dark hair, and they might try to change my skin color to look a little bit more, just like I've got a tan or something. I don't know, something like that. But we also had, and these are on display. I was just down at the Spy Museum for an event. They had these full masks as well. And so my mask was made to make me look like, and now I resent this, by the way, a 60-year-old Russian woman. And back then I was like, oh, that's so old, whatever. And so that was what mine looked like. The guy who made the masks for us, CIA, after Planet of the Apes, went out to that guy and said, we have a job for you. We want to do something like that, but we want to have masks that can change. And he helped us with that program. And that's the guy that did that. And so anyway, so I had one that made me look like probably a 50, 60-year-old Soviet woman and things like that. And then I also had a disguise to go with it that was padded to make me look a lot heavier and had all the Soviet clothes, that you would get that we had collected over the years and things like that. And so one day I got to use that a couple of times, but the best one was the first time I used it was when the boss really, 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 really needed something done. It had to be done. It had to be done that day. And other people in the station were getting surveillance, and I still was not. But I was starting to get some. I shouldn't say I was getting some, but I was not getting like the hard and fast, right behind your butt surveillance type of stuff. And so he said to me, he says, look, we want to use the mask that you have that makes you look old, and we're going to make you look a lot larger, and we're going to put you in Soviet clothes and all the rest of the stuff. And we're going to sneak you down to the consular section through the back door. And you're going to sit there with all the people that are waiting to get visas to go to America, to go visit their family in New York or wherever. And you're just going to sit there. And I said, well, I can't really talk in the mask. And they're like, yeah, so don't talk. And I said, what if somebody talks? And they're like, well, just say something really short. I'm like, okay, I'll think about this. And because you can't, back then, the later masks were better. You couldn't really talk well in them. And so anyway, so I go there and it all works out, and I sneak into the consular section, and I'm sitting in this chair, and there's this woman next to me, and I'm behind her on this, sitting on this bench, and it's consular sections are mayhem. You've got people sitting on benches waiting to get in line, and then lines of people waiting to get into other lines and everything else. And so it's very crowded. And so I'm sitting on this bench, which is where I was told to go first. And so I sit. And this woman is sitting there and she's mumbling, and I can hear her, in Russian. She's going, I can't believe how long this is going to take. This is so stupid. I really got to blah, 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 blah. And then she turns to me and she says, can you believe how stupid this is? This is really dumb, and, blah, 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 blah. And I don't want to speak Russian because A, I got this mask on, but B, my Russian's not fluent. And so I just looked at her, and, my eyes were showing and everything. And I just glared at her. I gave her a Soviet glare. And I said, Zhdu, which means I'm waiting. And she was like, then she starts swearing, "Oh, people just aren't nice nowadays. I just hate it when people aren't nice. These people aren't nice." And I just sat there. I'm like, "Oh, God." I got through that one. And then I walked out. I pretended I stood in line for a little bit, and then I went out the front, right past the armed KGB guards that were around us to protect us, our building, and I went off and I did my thing. And I was gone for 10 hours. And I came back, ditched the clothes and everything else into a bag I had that I'd carried out that looked big, but it had like a bunch of trash in it. I ditched the trash, put the clothes and stuff in it. So I came back with that. And then that was that, and came in. Now, the thing is it was odd because, I was out of pocket for so long. But at the same time, it wasn't so weird because sometimes they didn't follow me. And so it worked really well. And so, yeah, and that worked out great. Now, of course, within a few months, as I kept doing more and more different things, somewhere around year one and maybe 2 or 3 months, it was clear they knew that I was not just a cashier. And so that's when I was able to do more spectacular things and fun things. Yeah.
Cashier was your cover, was your initial cover within the embassy.
It was. And the reason is right before, let's see, I was there in 89. So it was somewhere in the mid 80s that we got in a big fight with the Russians, and we threw out a bunch of their diplomats. They threw out a bunch of ours. We threw out more. They threw out more. And then we had no more to throw out. They had a lot more diplomats than we had there. And then they then said, fine. And the next thing we're going to do, is we're taking all of our FSNs out, because you can go and wash your own clothes, and do your own things and do this and that and everything else.
So an FSN was a Soviet citizen that worked within the embassy.
That's right. Foreign Service National. And it's FSN all over the world. Yeah. And which was, Russians have later said, stupidest thing they ever did, because they weren't able to then, re-up the batteries and anything they had installed in the embassy or anything else. They could not get in. And so under some negotiations, we allowed them to have more diplomats, but we said we want contractors to come in and work in the embassy in the jobs that the FSNs did. And they said, okay, and that's what I was. That was my cover as one of these contractors. And we had full diplomatic immunity. Yeah.
And the job that you did for your boss, can you tell me a bit more detail as to what that was? That first job you did with the mask.
Yeah. No, so my job, I'm an operations officer. Back then it was called a case officer. It's now an ops officer. And so I would do a whole bunch of different things. So what I did with the mask is I went out. I eventually ditched everything. And then I shoved everything into a bag, because I couldn't really talk to the guy through the mask. So I had to I kept the Soviet clothes on, but basically ditched all the rest of the stuff. And so, because I needed to go and get this thing done. And so I went and I talked to this guy. And here's the thing is, none of us young people, none of us newbies even knew the full names of who we were meeting. Because that was kept up for the chief, and the deputy chief would know that. Once in a while, you might need to know it, but it was not like a given. You wanted to really keep that, whatever. But you knew a first name, that kind of thing. And so that first time that I went out and did this thing, actually, there's two things. I did a dead drop, and then I went and I had to go talk to this guy. And when I say talk to him, he had some papers to give to me, and I had some money to give to him. And so, and I believe for this guy, the money might have been in the form of either gold or something that was not dollars or rubles or something like that, or maybe a combination of it. And so counted all that stuff out, got some information from him, how his security situation was, et cetera. Asked him a couple of extra questions and all of that. And then that was that. so was able to get a lot of stuff done on that. I was also able to go check. They wanted me to go find a couple of more sites for future things that were in a couple of other places around Moscow that would be hard to do if you were under surveillance. So it was a busy day.
They were asking you to look for some potential dead drop sites or meeting
Dead
sites.
drop sites, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Like dead drop sites, car drop sites where you throw something out the window, things like that. Yeah. Sites where you could have a meeting privately, like a bench in a park that's far away from where other people walk, that sort of thing.
You mentioned a moment ago, you got into far more exciting stuff when you were in Moscow. Can you describe any of those?
My favorite one was when we really needed to do something badly. And by this point, I was already pretty much known. So this is my second year in Moscow, and probably towards the end of my second year, if I remember it correctly. The other one I was talking about was the first year. And so my boss says to me, Susan, I really need you to go and do this thing. And I really need you to do it even if you have surveillance. I'm like, well, how does that work? And he goes, well, you're a California driver and you admit that you've gotten a lot of tickets in your life. Use those skills and just beat out the cars. And back then they didn't have good cars. Now they have them. The Soviet government does. But they didn't have anything then. And so I had my American car. It was a Plymouth, I think. And I left and they were behind me and I just took off on the freeway and totally lost them. They could not keep up. I was going like 80 miles an hour and then I got off the road and then I did this and I did that, blah, 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 and everything else. And that was another really important thing that they wanted me to do. And so I went and did that one as well. And that was absolutely really fun to do. It involved both something I needed to put down to somebody and something that I needed to just quickly pass to somebody. So it was like a twofer. It was really fun.
I just imagine that a Plymouth is somewhat conspicuous in the Soviet Union to be driving around in.
It is conspicuous, but the thing is you ditch it. And first you see if you have surveillance. Can you lose surveillance? I lost surveillance, so I ditched it as soon as I knew I didn't have surveillance. And there was no cameras back in the days like there are now everywhere around the world, right? There's nothing like that. And so I would get on the first point of transportation I could get. And if it was a bus, I'd jump on the bus. If it was a tram, I'd jump on the tram. If it was a subway, I'd do that. And so for this one, I first got on a bus. And then the next point, some way down, I got off the bus and got onto the subway. And then I started doing the foot route to make sure that I didn't have any foot surveillance, and I didn't. So I was able to do the thing.
Were you using any gadgets to check for surveillance or anything like that? Was there any technology that you were using then?
Yeah, I think the Spy Museum has some of this. There was some, we had what I want to say, that the bandwidth on which the police all over the world, name a country, name a city, all works the same. You have walkie-talkies. That's what you have. You don't have cell phones. You don't have any other thing. So it all works on a certain bandwidth and things like that. And so at times we were able to see. We had a device that would allow us to know if we were being followed, because like if I'm driving and I take a left and it was called a thumper because it kind of like vibrated in your back pocket, and if that, as you turn, it vibrates, then okay, something might be wrong. If it turns again and it vibrates, okay, now something's probably wrong. And then you turn again, okay, now I know I'm under surveillance and I can't see it because they keep changing too much. And so you abort is what you do. And then if it's either clear, and once you get these kind of, signals all the time, but you have to see if it's following you or not, was how it was done.
So how was that device spotting the surveillance? Was it listening in on radio transmissions?
Yeah, I'm not technical, but my understanding is that we had it, or the tech guys in the office had it, like a radio, tuned to the surveillance frequencies, whatever they were using that day, and it would switch every now and then, of course. Yeah.
You're in Moscow sort of towards the end of the 1980s. Did you notice the changes that were going on as a result of the Gorbachev reforms?
What I saw there is, I remember one day, it was the same day as the fire, actually, now that I remember it. We were all excited about there was going to be this huge anti-Soviet protest. And our ambassador and others were like, oh, they're probably going to really crack down on this. So nobody go out there and anything else. And of course, the fire happened. So, of course, we're already out in front of the embassy, which is on the Ring Road, which is where the protest was. And so we got to see the protest. It was huge. It had like Soviet flags with crosses out of them and things like that. It was unbelievable. But what was more unbelievable is the police were just standing aside. And I don't know if that was something that was told, hey, just let them go and we'll fix it later. Or Gorbachev, was one of these, tear down this wall type person. Maybe he was thinking, maybe it should be a little bit better for his people. But in either sense, it was unfriggin' believable. And so it was right as some of these things that ended up bringing up basically the coup, as they call it, this big protest that went around the Ring Road where people were having, the Soviet flags dripping with blood and all this other stuff that was going on. Unfriggin' believable. And nobody was arrested. And so that gave us all hope that something would happen. Now, I understand later that a few of the organizers of this did get arrested, but basically they left people alone. And that was really interesting. And that also happened to be the day of the big embassy fire, where we all had to get out, and we had to get out the back, and we were all pitched over this big long wall, this big high wall, and then we all came out and watched the protest. Originally, we weren't going to watch the protest because we were worried that we might get caught up in some violence or whatever. But then we had nowhere to go, and so we just all of us friends kind of just meandered about and watched the protest. It was fascinating. Got some good pictures too.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow, because potentially at that point, Yeltsin is the president of Russia.
Yeah.
And so that I wonder whether the Moscow police were under their control, and therefore he'd said, don't arrest anybody. Allow the protests. Allow it to start to try and bring down the Soviet
That would be interesting to look and see if that actually is what happened. It might be that and I can see them wanting to just let it go, because if they started arresting, maybe it would, make things more unstable. But I never heard that back at the time. Yeah.
And this fire, was it quite a bad fire?
It was really bad.
I'm sorry, but that's it for this week's episode. Susan continues her story next week with a harrowing experience of the 1991 US Embassy fire in Moscow, where the unexpected humanity displayed by a KGB officer helped save lives during the crisis. In Poland, a KGB walk-in claims to have microfiche containing the names of every spy the KGB was running overseas. And as CIA chief in Vilnius, Susan is confronted by another KGB walk-in with a box of weapons-grade uranium. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. The episode extras such as videos, photos and other content are available via a link in the episode information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous efforts of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you next week.